Welcome back, home engine builders. Let's talk about how we're coming along on the 377, where it's at, and where we're going to go with it. As usual, I think kind of my stated purpose for documenting all of this stuff was to accomplish a few things. And, with each of the engines that we build, I kind of want to go through 6 different phases of it on the channel. That doesn't mean 6 different videos or episodes. There's probably going to be a lot more for each little phase, but number 1 is always talking about the engine purpose, because I think that kind of dictates where we go with stage number 2, the parts procurement, the how, where, the why. What are the implications when it comes to making those selections in terms of performance versus cost, and why you would make those decisions, or why I'm making them based on my intended engine purpose. Because even if we were working on the same vehicle, we might have 2 different engine purposes for it, and what's going to ultimately make us happy at the end, right? Number 3 is then to start getting into some of the general assembly stuff. And well, I've always stated that I'm not going to be a real in-depth how-to channel, because there's enough content out there on that. There are details and parts and pieces of the general assembly that I think are important enough to at least cover in brief. The 4th thing that we're going to get to, hopefully we're finally getting close to some of these things here on this stroker motor, a test stand break-in. That's going to be one of the things that I call the first payoff when we get to these. Number 5 is going to be dyno testing the combination that we put together, because otherwise there's no way to know. I mean, of course you're going to know by the seat of your pants when you put it in the vehicle, but the dyno is going to give not only a true number, it's also going to help you make other decisions, like if you're running an automatic transmission, what kind of torque converter do you want to put in this to fit your engine combination with your car combination, and are there other things that you're going to have to change to make all of this work together? So I don't want to leave out the dyno. I think that's going to be fun, and that's going to be an additional payoff. Then what happens once it comes off the dyno? What does that really mean? Well, for the first one that I'm building on this stroker, I've got a vehicle to put it in. It's a running, driving vehicle now that actually runs fantastic. So we're going to get to do an A to B comparison in the vehicle after it comes off the dyno. And to that end, something I picked up, I think this is going to be really fun, and this is going to be kind of a payoff I don't know that I ever really intended on doing. But I picked up one of these draggy devices. So hopefully next week or in the next couple weeks, I'm going to plug it in, and we're going to see what the Blazer does stock right now, or stock as in its current configuration. I think we've discussed it's not actually stock, but as it stands now. And how bad it is, I don't know. How bad it isn't, and then we'll see what kind of a difference it makes. All other things aside, the purpose, the dyno numbers, none of that's going to matter unless it really makes a substantial difference in the truck. And we'll find out. That's going to tell if we're nailing this combination right. So the engine purpose, I am switching gears, and I'm going to deploy this 377 stroker into my K5 Blazer. It's lifted. It's on 35-inch mud terrains that are E-rated, so they're heavy. And as it stands now, with the factory 190 horsepower, as it was factory rated, I think, with the TBI injection on it, you can imagine it's pretty bad. I don't know what gear ratio is in it, and I hate to say that. I'll find out here eventually, because that is something that's certainly going to have to get changed, but that won't come until later. And there's a reason I don't know. We've got the codes that are in the glove box. I know what it came with factory, but this Blazer has already been modified. It's got the 35s on it. It's been lifted a little bit to clear those. Not too much, just enough to clear the tires, which is the way I like it. But at any rate, somebody has already swapped in at a 12 bolt, and mine's an 88 model. They stopped with the 12 bolt, boy, I think back in the 70s. That went into these trucks, or, I don't know, I suppose somebody could have got it out of one of them heavy half-ton trucks or something like that and swapped it in. But it's obviously, it's not stock, so my glove box, the code data is irrelevant. There's no tag on it. And, you know, my plan all along has been to modify this truck when I got it, even though it's a perfectly good running driver. Its intent has always been to be a project, and my plan is to go through all of the vital components to make sure I've got a reliable, you know, street slash trail rig. And, you know, it's not going to be a rock crawler, which is kind of why I'm going to the engine purpose. Here in the South, you know, when I'm getting this thing off-road, I'm not going to Moab. I'm not going to make it out to Colorado and go rock crawling with this thing. The type of terrain that I'm going to encounter here, you know, I'm more likely to hit a big mud hole and go, oh no, that's 100, that's 200 yards. I'm about to have to hammer down for an 1/8 mile through a mud. And so, you know, for the purpose of this truck, it may hurt some of the right-off response stuff, but I'm kind of going for more of a little street strip style motor as opposed to a dedicated truck motor, because if I hit that mud hole, I want to be able to hammer into it and make it cross, and I'm kind of willing to give up a little bit on the low end to make that happen and have it pull when I really need it to, and I don't want to be stuck. So that's the engine purpose, which brings me to the parts procurement and how and why. So to that end, to accomplish this, I do want to put reasonably good stuff in it. I don't think it's going to see 6,000 RPM, not much more than that. With the cam selection I've made, cylinder head selection, and its intended purpose, there's just no need for that. So to keep costs down, I did go with a Summit rotating assembly. I didn't buy the whole rotating assembly. I pieced it together from parts, getting what was on sale, to put that together as cheap as possible. I did get it back from the machine shop, so progress is being made. We're edging closer to step 3 general assembly. That should start happening in earnest this week. I got held up as usual, kind of waiting on some more parts and bits and pieces to come in. You know, I've moved several times and I can't find my thread chaser set, and didn't realize that till the last minute. So as I was cleaning up the block, I don't want to use my tap and die set. You want to use the proper tool. I'm going to use thread chasers or thread cleaners, thread repairers, restorers, whatever you want to call them, in order to get the block all cleaned up and start getting it ready for assembly. That should start in earnest this week. Truth is, that's a lot of hours, and with the amount of hours I have in a week, it's probably going to take a couple weeks at least for me to do that, but I'm going to start making progress on it. But so we're still on step number 2 here in the parts procurement, and why? So we went around, what am I going to use it for? So I wanted to put kind of good stuff on it, so I went with Brodix for the cylinder heads, and I went with IK 200s, and for the money, there are options out there that are either made offshore or made by private equity. And I'm not necessarily saying that that makes those two things bad, but I wanted to kind of put my money where my mouth is and use 100% made in the USA parts when it's, you know, when it comes to some of the stuff that matters, like the heads. And Brodix is still privately owned. They're still casting all of their own stuff here in the United States, machining them. Everything is done here in the United States, and I feel good about getting that. Now, you know, that's not to say that a lot of this imported stuff has come a long way and it can be really great. So I'm not knocking it for that. This is, you know, I do believe that this is in fact better quality in terms of what it's going to be, how long it's going to last over the long run, and what their durability and overall quality is going to be. There's stuff in the same price range that undoubtedly, I think it's already been proven by others, that out of the box can make a little bit more power than these at the same price range. But this isn't an all-out drag motor, so that's not an issue here. This was more important to me. So, you know, and you can see it, the studs and guide plates that they put in them, they're using quality parts. You know, I mean, those are coming from I'm not going to say what's stamped on them, but those are name brand parts from another brand that you recognize. I haven't got out my spring tester yet. These just came in, so I'm going to disassemble them, and I'm going to double check all the springs and everything else. But from all the research I've done, when you get these Brodix head, their spring setup is pretty typically spot on. I'm going to double check it just to be sure, but typically it's pretty spot on, and the springs are able to handle what they're advertised as far as running your cam and whatnot. I think it's been well documented that some of the less expensive stuff, if you start to get a little aggressive on a roller cam or aggressive on your cam profiles, the springs that come in the cheaper stuff really isn't up to the task at all. And that's initially, not to mention what's going to happen over the long term, but I've got confidence these are good parts. So that's part of the why I made that decision on the heads. I'm going to use the 1.6 rockers on them, Dove Manufacturing. Those again, coming out of Ohio, 100% made in the US. So a quality part there that, again, I mean, I think they're reasonable price to get 100% made in the USA part. So I feel good about that. The cam. This is where things get a little bit interesting. It's one of the most important, and I think it's always going to be both the cam and the heads. They got to work together. They got to work with your combination. They're both difficult and important decisions that have to be made. And so I was kind of taking all of these things into consideration, and that led me to go to the decision I made. You see behind me there, I went with Howard's, and I went with the Rattler grind. And that's kind of an interesting thing to me because I think it's kind of a similar concept to like the Comp Thumper line that's supposed to give you a pretty good sound and everything else, where that's one of the considerations they made when they made this camshaft. And that's not why I chose it. And what Howard did, when I just started looking at profiles in general, first of all, I wanted to get something that was gonna obviously not be too big, because I gotta pull them big old tires around. But I also wanted to do what I could to take advantage of what I'm given on these cylinder heads, So I wanted to try and keep duration relatively mild for a 377 and still kind of get as much lift as I possibly could. And I really liked, so, I wasn't looking at the name brand, the Rattler, and that thumpy idle wasn't really what I was going for. And they're doing it a little bit different than Comp. So like, to compare to specs, these are the Howard's versus the Comp. 227 on the intake, that's at 50 duration. The Howard's at the stock factory lift ratio, 1.5, has a 525 lift on the intake, where the Comp's only a 511, okay? Then we go to the exhaust, and this is where things really start to get different. Lift aside, Howard's has a more standard kind of street split. They're at 235 degrees on the exhaust. So 7, maybe only 1 degree more than you would typical see for a small block Chevy roller grind. They went 7 degrees of split instead of 6. Comp bumps the exhaust all the way up to 241. But then here's where, kind of like in my mind, things go off the rail. And it brought me away from the Comp and towards the Howard's. The Howard's is 235, the 530 lift. So they're doing the things the way, like in my mind, you would more typically see. More duration and a little bit more lift on the exhaust, where Comp, they throw a whole pile of duration or split into it, and they lower the lift on the exhaust at 498 at the factory ratio, and then they bring it in on a 107 center line versus the Howard's 109. So this is why those Humpers do what they are advertised to do, and they give you that pretty nasty idle. That's a ton of overlap. The Howard's being on a 109 with a less aggressive split, but even more lift, I think it's I just honestly really like those specs. And running a 1.6 ratio, I'm going to end up lifting the valve, theoretically, where I'm not talking about deflection and all that. We'll measure it when I get it together and see how much that does impact me and come into play. But so the theoretical number is going to be like 560, 563 on the lift. With a little bit less duration than you get on the Comp and kind of a lot less of overlap. So I think that's going to kind of make for a good mid-range power production. I mean, if I could have gone with a smaller cam and maybe improved some of the absolute down low, but I think this is going to end up being pretty good because, you know, when they spec these cams and they expect the rev range to run from, this is advertised at 1800, I think, to 56 or 5800, where the comp is 1900 to 56 or 5800. You know, I think one, they kind of make those assumptions on it being the industry standard for decades, a 350 cubic inch motor, not necessarily a stroker. So I think this motor is going to swallow this cam reasonably well as far as the low end goes. And, you know, I also think having a pretty good set of cylinder heads on there is also just going to help it work. And I think it's going to make pretty good power everywhere. We'll see whether I'm right about that or not. You know, so I went with the Howard's retrofit roller lifters to go with it. I'm probably going to set it at the recommended rate, but I am going to degree the cam in. But just in case there's changes that have to be made, or I do a little bit more research and decide I want to advance it or retard it a little bit more than installing it straight up, I did get the Howard's timing set that has the adjustable crank gear, so you know I can make sure I do get the cam degreed in properly. And that's why I made all those decisions and the progress that's being made on this 377 so far. Coming up this week, I do hope, time is always short with me. I mean, you know, money's tight for all of us, God, we know that. And time may be an even more valuable resource that's tough to come by. So hopefully I can get onto that. Going on to the general assembly again, in the engine purpose, I'm going to end up running, I think, that I'm inclined to change my mind at any time, but I'm trying to get stuff off the wall and use it. So I've already pulled up and I'm test fitting the zinc oil pan that used to reside up there. I'm going to pull off that Performer RPM intake manifold and use it there. You know, I kind of thought about the air gap, and I've never done any side-by-side personal dyno comparisons, but from what I understand from the industry and everything that's out there, they really actually perform about the same. Really, really close anyhow. Not enough to make a big difference at the kind of power level we're looking at here. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm kind of hoping to eke out around 400 horsepower, but I don't necessarily have a number in mind. We'll just see where those chips fall, you know, once we get it on the dyno. But, you know, my expectation is going to be somewhere between 375 and 425. Maybe it ekes out, so I'm just calling it around 400 horsepower. That should be a pretty good manifold for that. And the purpose, selecting these components too, you know, I just get to thinking, and I've had to do it before. I don't want to have to clean underneath all them air gaps. So it kind of comes down to the purpose and everything else. If this was going to be more of a weekend cruiser street strip thing that you either take to the strip or you take to the car shows and it lives its life sheltered in a garage and gets kind of rubbed down nicely, you know, the air gap, in my opinion, does kind of look cooler, at least in that certain way. But there are downsides to that. Boy, it's not easy to clean down in there. To be honest, it's really kind of quite a pain. It gets all grungy down in there if you're using and abusing an engine the way I intend on doing this one, and I don't want to deal with that. Secondary to that, back to the engine purpose, you know, I'm kind of building this going into this K5 Blazer as a little bit of a nostalgia thing, and I think the older style intake that's giving me the same performance is going to fit that bill. Like I said, I'm going with the, you know, zinc anodized oil pan that's going to go on it, the zinc timing cover, just kind of, you know, more of an old school look, and I think that's going to be fitting to go with that. They're getting harder and harder to come by. I hope I can get a traditional zinc finish Holly for it, but I've been shopping. I don't know if I want to pay the extra price for that versus what the, you know, all the more modern versions that can be had a little bit more affordable and probably even perform a little better, have more tunability built into them. I'm really leaning towards ATM. I'm just not going to be able to get it in that zinc finish. I don't know that I'm going to consider it worth it to pay for a lesser performing poly, just to get that look I want. But nonetheless, that's just, you know, some of the decisions that are bearing on this. I'm going to go with that. Hopefully I'll get y'all an update. We should be on to General Assembly next week. Doing this, I've upped my game. And I have no intentions of being a review channel, but I think it'll be interesting. I'm interested to find out, so I don't know. Let me know if you are down in the comments if you'd like to actually see a little review on it. I really upped my game on the ring filer instead of an old hand crank. I don't know that I have the patience for that. I'm hoping this is really gonna help the process of getting my ring gap set up. I've spent a considerable amount of time having to do that before. I mean, you know, a full honest day's work worth of back and forth and grinding and grinding and grinding. I'm hoping this can speed up that process, make it a little easier on my hand and arm. I don't know that you can see I'm kind of losing the ability to sit there and do those repetitive motions for an 8-hour day nonstop. If y'all are curious as to how that works out, I'm certainly curious. I haven't used it yet. We'll see if I make it that far on the cleanup and getting the engine put together this week. If not, hopefully next. And you'll want to see kind of some of the product reviews as I'm up in the tool game, and I can let y'all know if I thought it was a worthwhile investment or not, because like all tools, it is an investment and there are choices. You can get one for $23.99 and hand crank it. I'm hoping I'm throwing mine away. It'll never be used again, but the proof will be in the pudding when we get to that and are on to step 3 of the General Assembly, and then we're inching closer. Most of the rest of the parts are supposed to be coming in next week. I'm going to be lacking a fuel system and you know, the carburation for it. I've got a full front accessory drive to put on it. So we're getting real close to test and fire up, and it won't be next week. I can assure you that. It's going to be at least a couple weeks, but we're racing towards getting to one of those first payoffs. And when I picked the crankshaft up from the machine shop, which by the way, I'm really impressed with, it was an inexpensive crank, and it doesn't look, based on the amount that they drilled. I mean, yeah, they had to drill it. We got 3 holes on one end, 2 on another, and a couple tiny ones kind of in the middle. It looks like they really did a fine job of it. But I'm kind of impressed that that cheap crank and cheap rotating assembly did balance out so well. They gave me no complaints on it. They were like, yeah, this thing did. It came in, it balanced up great. The work that they did on the machine shop, again, I don't have a lot of experience with getting these things back from high quality machine shops, but I'm impressed with the way they drilled the holes. They're all clean. They're all chamfered nice. They polished it. In my non-expert opinion, it looks really good, and I'm really pleased with it. And they turned it around quick. I asked them to order in a couple parts for me in terms of the flex plate and harmonic balancer. So even with that holding them up a day or two, they still had it turned around to me in a week, which for a shop that's as busy as they are, I think is really reasonable. I'm happy about that, and we'll get another update from them soon. Hopefully. They had not yet started on the aluminum block, and when I dropped it off, they told me that was going to be the case, but it was sitting there on the floor right in queue. Because it's kind of such an antique, the guys in the shop are kind of looking forward to working with it a little bit. So we'll see. Hopefully they really can save it and do a good job on that one, and we'll move on from there. Guys, pardon me for y'all having to watch me sweat through this. My shop is, it got 88 degrees today, and my tiny little shop is kind of like an oven here, and it's not climate controlled, and I'm still 2 weeks into basically not having the full regaining of my voice since I got sick on that business trip. So I appreciate y'all kind of suffering through this with me and bearing with me, but I think it's real exciting that we're making progress. We're making progress with some good parts, and I'm hoping a lot of y'all are going to be interested to see what this particular combination does, because I've Googled it. I haven't seen anybody put up on the internet any dyno numbers. You can see idling videos of this and similar camshafts, but I haven't seen anybody put up dyno numbers of it or the IK200 heads, or much less, even more important, them put together on a 373 or 383 stroker. And with this stuff being so readily available, you know, I think it'd be nice to actually know what a combination like that does. Everybody's is always going to be a little different, so your results could vary, but it gives you a pretty good baseline or benchmark to know what you're looking out for when you're selecting parts for your build. And getting that draggy out there, that's going to be real fun, and seeing what kind of difference this does, especially with, you know, what some would say is a little bit of a big camshaft to be putting in a motor that small that's going in a truck and tires that big. Let's see what it actually does. People say that. What does it really mean? I've never seen anybody show me the draggy numbers of the before and after. I have a hard time believing I'm going to make it worse than it is now. But home engine builders, the proof will be in the pudding on that when we get to testing it. So thanks for tuning in again. General assembly, step number 3, hopefully coming next week. Hang in there with me and tune in.